helping others with imposter syndrome. That's what we're talking about today. And I know a lot of you will know me already. If you don't, I've spent 20 years specializing in this field. Okay, that is 20 years just of professional expertise. I'm trying to put this on flight mode because it just sent a phone call through, and it's like, no, I really don't. I'm just going to put this outside my office. I've spent the last 20 years specializing in this field. But before that, I used to be an engineer. I've since written 10 books. I teach internationally, and everything I do is grounded in practical common sense, science, evidence, research, testing what does and doesn't work. So what you're going to get today is practical. There will be some things you can take away to apply right away. And I'm hoping to change the way you think about a few things as well. And I really want to hear from you via the comments. If you've got a question, or there's something I say that you want to know more about, or something I say that's not quite clear for you, let me know. I will either pick it up as we go through, if that's the best place to answer it, or I will answer it for you at the end. Is that all right with everyone? Fantastic. So, I don't want to waste your time. So I'm going to start with, just in case you're in the wrong place, yeah? If you're looking for instant fixes, if you want to do therapy in the workplace, if you would rather rely on Google and AI than proven strategies, and if you get offended if at some points during this talk I tell you what the next steps might be at appropriate points, then this probably isn't the right session for you. No hard feelings. But if you want to help others with imposter syndrome, if you want the data, not guesses, you want proven evidence-based strategies that you can start applying right away, and you're willing to put in a little bit of effort to make the difference you want to make, and it's important to you that you are not crossing the boundary between coaching and therapy, and you believe that everyone deserves support to fulfill their potential, and you want to look back at you want to look back at the next hour and be glad you came, then you're in the right place. And thank you. So can I have a yes from everybody who feels like they're in the right place over in the chat? Thank you, everyone. So what we're going to cover today is what imposter syndrome is and isn't, what the latest research says from our 2024 research study, how to spot the warning signs, removing the taboo in the workplace or with your clients if you're a coach or a consultant, why confidence isn't the answer. Now, you might have noticed when you registered for this session, you had a chance to ask me a question. One of the most popular questions was, how can I help my teammates to feel more confident? So I'm going to share with you a technique that you'll be able to use right away after today, but I am spoiler alerting. It's about the route to confidence rather than the confidence, and sometimes focusing on that means we're getting this back to front. So I hope that's going to be useful for you. We're going to look at how to help others if you're secretly struggling too, something else that came back a lot via the pre-session feedback. That one potential life-changing tool you can take away to start using with your team members or clients right away. Some free resources that you can dive in with, and what to do if you want to take the next steps. So, while we move on to the next section, let me know via the chat which one of those points resonates with you, or which multiple of those points. Thinking about what we're going to be covering today, there you go, I'll get myself out of the way. Which one of those would be a priority for you? And I will make sure that we have covered that in the detail that you're looking for today. Let me know via the chat. So, who am I to? This is one of the earliest warning signs for imposter syndrome. Who am I to do that? Who am I to step up for that opportunity? Who am I to take that risk? Who am I to think anybody would listen to me? And this is the self-talk that you will often find in colleagues and clients when they're running imposter syndrome. And it's the self-talk that I was running back in 2000, 2001, when I quit the engineering career I loved due to imposter syndrome, and I didn't even know it had a name. I was a rising star, I was performing well, I was getting outstanding appraisals, I was being promoted, but secretly at 3 o'clock every morning I was lying awake at night, terrified that today would be the day my luck ran out. Today would be the day they would find out I was a fraud, that I wasn't good enough, that I had pulled the wool over their eyes, that I didn't belong in the senior engineering role that I had, that somehow I had faked it. And so, because the overworking didn't fix it, The adrenaline, the cortisol, the stress, the pushing on through the fear was costing me. It was affecting my mental health. It harmed my closest relationships. I decided to do what we so often do, which is I ran. But I justified it by saying I was taking a sabbatical and I was going to spend a year traveling in South America and studying Spanish. I thought if I ran away, the problems would disappear. So I quit the engineering career I loved because of imposter syndrome before I even knew it had a name. If I'd known it existed, I wouldn't have thought I was the only person feeling that way. If there had been anybody in my organisation who had had training in how to support someone to clear this, I would still be an engineer today. Which means we wouldn't be here right now. So there are pluses, yeah? But I quit the engineering career I loved because of imposter syndrome, and I do not want that for you and your colleagues. So what is imposter syndrome and how is it different to self-doubt? So I define imposter syndrome as the secret fear of being found out as not good enough or a fraud, despite external world evidence that you're doing well. And here's the thing, that me that quit the engineering career I loved due to imposter syndrome, our 2024 research study found it's 1 in 10 of your team members thinking of doing that every single day. 1 in 4 every single week. So this isn't something that we can just brush under the carpet and pretend it's not there. That is 1 in 10 of your workforce who every single day are struggling with the impact of imposter syndrome to an extent that they are thinking of quitting. Obviously, not all of them will. But those that do won't mention imposter syndrome in their exit interview if you run them. And like me, they're likely to be doing something that doesn't make you think it was imposter syndrome at all. They're likely to be going to another company to get promoted because the fear of applying internally and not publicly being seen not to get it is too much. With women of a certain age, as we're now called, so with perimenopausal women, you will often find that they will go for a reduction in responsibilities because the hormone changes at menopause mean that imposter syndrome becomes even more severe. There are all sorts of different things people do, leaving to set up their own businesses, taking a leave of absence, which is what I did, taking a sabbatical, but 1 in 10. Now, I don't want you to share this via the chat. I just want you to think about this for yourself for a moment. Thinking about the people you work with, who might be in that 1 in 10 today? Who might be in that 1 in 4? We can't know because we don't know for definite what's happening inside their heads, but the chances are your gut's already got a pretty good idea of who's struggling with this. And they're the people I want you to focus on for the rest of this session, is how you can help them. So how widespread is it? It has gone up by 1/5 since the pandemic. We did a huge research study in 2019 and we found in 2024 that the rates had gone up by 1/5. So I'm going to give you some numbers here. Okay, hang on a second. I need to get back to the right screen to press the right button. There you go, I've disappeared. Perfect. We found last year that 62% of women are struggling with this daily or regularly to a point that it's affecting their well-being and their performance. Let me know via the chat, what do you think the figure was for the men? So for women, it's 62%. What percentage of men do you think struggle with this daily or regularly to a point that affects their well-being and their performance? So we've got a 24, we've got a 30, another 30, a bit lower but not much, 50, 35, 25, 50. I've got a couple of sort of 10s and 15s here. So you might be surprised to hear the figure's 59%. So if we're looking at statistical significance, it's within what my grandmother would have called a gnat's fart. The same, okay? It's basically the same. So 62% for women, 59% for men. It's pretty much the same. Why is it then? Why is it everybody thinks this is just a woman's problem? And it's because of something else that we found from the research study, that women were 20 times more likely than men to talk about this, to ask for help, to share their experiences. Men were significantly more likely to push it down, pretend it's not happening, push on through the fear, which was then leading to anxiety and physical, emotional and mental health issues for them. We found that men were 5 times more likely than women to turn to drugs, alcohol and medication. to cope with the stress of this, and that it was much more likely to affect a man's significant relationship negatively than a woman's, because the woman is more likely to be talking about it and getting the support they need. With men, it was triggering anxiety and chronic stress, triggering that fight, flight, freeze response, affecting how their team members experienced working with them, and their significant partnerships and relationships at home. So this is a man and a woman thing. It's just women talk about it more. Okay, so my secret definition of imposter syndrome is it's the secret fear of others judging us the way we judge ourselves. And this is really the key. Imposter syndrome is about judging ourselves. It's not about evaluating our performance. It's about taking feedback and making it about who we are. It's an identity level issue. And so the solution isn't to kind of like paper over the cracks with, pep talks and positive affirmations and mindset stuff. All of that can help with the symptoms, but this helps us understand why imposter syndrome, to clear it out, actually needs that deeper work, because it's about letting go of judging ourselves so that we can feel comfortable in our own skin, show up as all of who we really are, obviously within professional boundaries, and fulfill our potential. But that secret fear of others judging us the way we judge ourselves. And if you're a brave soul, let me know with a yes via the chat if that definition resonates with you, either for yourself or for people that you've worked with, where you've seen maybe imposter syndrome is running, that self-judgment internal narrative and the fear that others are doing it too. Okay. Yeah, I've got a lot of yeses. I've got definitely, yeah, that sits well. Thank you. So it's not the same as self-doubt. And this is one of the big problems with imposter syndrome is, like every time you open the internet, somebody else is sitting there going, oh, I've got imposter syndrome and I succeeded to become this famous person despite imposter syndrome. Or you get people saying it's just a normal part of life and it's growing pains and it's part of growing and stretching and becoming who you are. It's not. What's really happening with so much of this is they're confusing it with self-doubt. Imposter syndrome and self-doubt are kind of like cousins. You can have one without the other, but there is definitely an overlap, yeah? And, if you imagine the Venn diagram, there's a bit in the middle where you can have both imposter syndrome and self-doubt, but you can also have each of them independently. So we found from our 2019 study that self-doubt is about what you can and can't do. Imposter syndrome is about who we think we are. So self-doubt and confidence are about our skills, our capabilities, our experience, our network. Imposter syndrome is about who we see ourselves as being and the gap between that and who we think we need to be able to succeed. And to get over that gap, because sometimes we just have to achieve whatever's on the other side, we build what I call the bridge of coping strategies to succeed despite imposter syndrome. And this is one of the reasons why it's so harmful, is because we are pushing on through the fear. We're using the coping strategies like overworking, setting impossible standards, pushing on through our worries and anxieties. So many of the symptoms that people sent me in the questions prior to this masterclass session, we're using those to succeed despite imposter syndrome, and they come at huge physical, emotional, and mental well-being cost. So if you're seeing advice out there on the internet that says, oh, it's just normal and everybody gets it and it's a normal part of stretching a comfort zone, the chances are they're confusing imposter syndrome with self-doubt. So what causes it? This can be really useful for you in a workplace environment, or if you're working with clients as a coach or a consultant. And the answers might surprise you. So I often hear people saying that imposter syndrome is caused by your childhood. And so we have to go back to our childhood to find the causal event, and we have to deal with that, and we have to speak our truth to the person that caused the harm. That's actually therapy, not coaching. And that's absolutely not where we should be going unless you've had formal therapeutic training. Yeah, the risk of causing harm with that approach is really, really high. Now, what I found is obviously our childhood experiences can play a role, because they do in anything that we do, from being able to do the shopping or go driving or be CEO of a multinational company. But there are some triggers that you can use to predict when imposter syndrome might strike for a team member. And it's anything that shifts our sense of identity. So you know that imposter syndrome gap I talked about between who we see ourselves as being and who we think we need to be? Anything that shifts this bit, who we see ourselves as being, or who we think we need to be to achieve something, widens that gap. The old bridge of coping strategies is no longer enough, and the severity of the imposter syndrome increases. So some examples: a promotion, even a hint of it, okay? A new job, new role, new employer, new project, anything that shifts who we see ourselves as being, because it's that identity level issue. Becoming a parent is a huge one. You can have workplace imposter syndrome because you've had that major shift in who you see yourselves as being. Losing a loved one is another really big one. It shifts our sense of identity. Being more visible, taking on projects that mean that we're higher profile or we feel there's a spotlight shining on us. This one is particularly important for ED&I initiatives, where you might offer somebody an opportunity in order to create equity, but if they then feel like what they would describe to me in the research as the poster child, it actually makes imposter syndrome worse for them. And stretching a comfort zone. Anything that shifts who we see ourselves as being or who we think we need to be. And this is why I really encourage organisations to have proactive intervention to support and prevent imposter syndrome from kicking off, because people try really hard to hide it. You will have some people saying, "Yay, I'm experiencing imposter syndrome today," but they're the rare ones. The vast majority of people in your teams will be using the coping strategies in order to be able to pretend to the outside world that everything's fine. So unless you're proactively looking for these triggers, the chances are that somebody will have taken one of the actions like self-sabotaging or even quitting the role they love in order to cope with imposter syndrome. And there are 3 pillars. I remember a good few years ago running a business leadership workshop for a corporation, and somebody in the audience in the chat very bravely said, "Why is it all about us? Why are we the ones that have got to be fixed?" And that's actually not the case at all. There are 3 amplifiers for imposter syndrome, and the individual only plays a role really for one of them. So these 3 pillars, 3 amplifiers, are the culture. That can be an organizational culture, it can be a team culture, it can be a project culture if it's cross-team, faith-based community. If we're looking at schools, it can be cliques, gangs. The culture, which is kind of like the values and how does the world work. You can take somebody with crippling imposter syndrome from one culture, from one context, and get them working in another, and it disappears. So the culture plays a huge role. The second pillar, that amplifier, is the environment. Okay? The environment is like, what does the culture mean on a practical level? Yeah, it's not about trees and grass. It's about what is the working environment? How do the policies and procedures support or prevent imposter syndrome? And again, that can be quite context and team specific. And then the third amplifier is our personal habits. That's where it comes down to the individual. So some people will have wired their neurology without even realizing to increase the risk of imposter syndrome. Other people will have wired it so that they're more immune to it. There are so many different individual differences, but in general, those 3 amplifiers, whenever I'm working with an organization to bring in solutions for imposter syndrome, I always encourage them to look at the 3 amplifiers. There's no point in just helping the people to clear it if you're going to put them back in a culture and an environment that was triggering those issues in the first place. Yeah, we need to make it so that the culture and the environment support people in thriving, because when they're thriving, they're happy and they don't quit. So you have better staff retention, you have less absenteeism and less sick leave, and you don't have toxic teams and line managers. One of the things that so often happens with imposter syndrome, and I actually spent the first 2 years of my coaching and leadership development career specializing in this field, is line managers who've got promoted beyond the point where the bridge of coping strategies was working. And so they turn into toxic micromanaging bully bosses. It's like they have a personality transplant overnight. And I'm sure we've all seen this in practice. If you help that person clear the imposter syndrome, they can go back to being the brilliant people person, strategist, whatever it was that meant they got promoted. But that stress response, one of the coping strategies, is to potentially turn toxic, and that is incredibly common. So I've got a question here. Environment includes belonging to a group in the workplace. So if I don't answer this in full, do come back on at the end of the call and ask again. So the environment in the workplace, it can mean everything from, the factors from, for example, is it home working, office working, hybrid, and how does that fit with a person's needs? It can be things like one organisation I worked with last year, they got rid of this, but they had like a little ticker banner across the bottom of everybody's screens that had information that they were meant to keep track of and important announcements during the day. And it would just flash, and people are working quite happily, concentrating on coding, which is what the main role was. And suddenly this flash comes up, this interruption, constant interruptions. The environment can be things like how quickly you required to respond to, say, a Teams ping. Yeah, one of my coaching clients a couple of years ago, we had a 45-minute session. She had over 100 pings in that 45 minutes. And with each of them, she felt the pressure to respond within minutes because everything was firefighting and an emergency. So it's this kind of thing. Okay, hidden warning signs. They are masters of disguise. People really try hard to hide imposter syndrome. So here's what we found from the research studies. This is some of the coping strategies that people use for imposter syndrome and some of the impacts it has. Letting others take credit, overlooked for promotions, turning down opportunities to shine, quitting, sabbatical, not speaking up with my ideas or toning them down and going beige, setting unrealistic expectations of myself, struggling to make decisions, limiting someone's progress, putting in too much effort for poorer results, overwhelm, burnout. That came up a lot actually from the people who signed up to join us today as one of the symptoms that they're seeing. Letting a project go in the wrong direction. So this is another really big one, is not challenging groupthink. This is a huge cost for organizations as well as teams. People pleasing, overworking, anxiety, self-doubt and worry, not wanting to be visible, not fulfilling my potential, and scared to ask questions. So the thing is, you can have the best training in the world, you can have the best strategies and the best procedures, but if somebody hasn't cleared imposter syndrome, they risk subconsciously self-sabotaging their success, the team's success, the organization's success. And even if they manage to succeed despite imposter syndrome, which lots of people do, the personal cost is huge. The energy and effort it takes is huge. The chronic stress can lead to long-term burnout. It can impact team dynamics, people's relationships, creativity. That's literally something wired in the brain, is when imposter syndrome strikes, it's really hard to have creative, innovative ideas. We play safe. These are some of the ways that you might see this showing up in your organizations. So let me know via the chat. And remember, you can message direct to me if you prefer. Is which of those are you seeing in your teams? Which of those symptoms do you recognize? And are there any other warning signs that you're seeing about the potential impact of imposter syndrome? So I'm going to keep going and then we'll come back to anything that you put in the chat on that one. So how to spot the warning signs. I want to share with you my 4 Ps of imposter syndrome model. This came from the 2019 research study, and it is 4 key behaviors that are a stress response. And if you see shifts in these, it can indicate that somebody is using imposter syndrome coping strategies. So the first is perfectionism, setting standards incredibly high and writing it off as fluke or luck if you actually achieve them. Procrastination, putting things off or losing yourself in busyness in order to avoid doing the thing that is triggering those imposter syndrome fears. Project paralysis, rabbit in headlights, and doing absolutely nothing until you can use the stress and adrenaline of the deadline to push on through those fears. And people pleasing. That might be going into a meeting with one set of priorities and coming out with a completely different one, or saying yes to what really should be a no. We can all find examples of this, yeah? So again, looking at your teams or yourself, we're not going to know which one it is in the chat. How many of these have you seen in the last couple of weeks? How many of the 4 Ps, the perfectionism, procrastination, project paralysis, and people pleasing? So we got all of them, three out of four, people pleasing, absolutely. And if I look back at the earlier comments, yep, overwhelm and burnout in team members, not putting ideas forward, decision making, overwhelm and burnout. Yep, people saying procrastination, perfectionism. So some people will run these naturally. It's just how they're wired, it's how they're used to operating in the workplace. But what you're looking for if you're working with someone who you think might have imposter syndrome is a sudden change. Now, particularly if we look at all of these are kind of time sucks. Yeah, so if you've got somebody who takes on a new project or challenge and suddenly they're working much longer hours than you would have expected based on the output that you're seeing, that can be a warning sign they're running these. The perfectionism is what often comes out as that micromanaging and bullying, because we project our own need for things to be perfect onto those that we're working with, because their mistakes will make us be found out as a fraud. The procrastination is a huge issue for productivity. It's not just the cute cat videos, it's getting lost down rabbit holes in order to avoid doing the thing that was actually more important. Project paralysis. That's not just going back to school days and thinking, gosh, I left that essay till the night before. This can have a huge knock-on effect for anyone who's relying on your output for theirs. And this one often shows up in a culture of firefighting, where everything has become an emergency because it's become too normal for people to project paralysis their way through the day, meaning everybody's knock-on effect is I didn't get what I needed until the last minute, and so everything feels urgent. The brilliant news is, even if you've seen all four of these, when you clear imposter syndrome, the need for them disappears. So you don't need the time management strategies. You need to clear out the stuff that was inside that meant these were the coping strategies that somebody subconsciously decided to rely on. And there's a direct link with burnout. So our 2022 study found that there is a causal relationship, not a correlation, between imposter syndrome and burnout. So if you increase one, you increase the other, and vice versa. That causal link is something called hypervigilance, which happens when somebody is stuck in chronic stress, the fight, flight, freeze response, which is one of the coping strategies for imposter syndrome. The hypervigilance means we're constantly on the lookout for threats. And it means that we will employ the coping strategies that go with imposter syndrome in order to succeed and feel sort of vaguely safe. These are exhausting for the body, the emotions, and mental health. And so there is a direct relationship between imposter syndrome and burnout. So if you're working in an organization and you want to raise the topic of imposter syndrome, you watch this session, you think, do you know what, I have to talk to so-and-so. What on earth do you do so that they don't run for the hills every single time you come round a corner? It's how to raise the topic. So removing the taboo is really important, because you might have support mechanisms you've put in place. You might decide to train some people up on, say, my practitioner program, bring in the boot camp as imposter syndrome boot camp as a resource. But even the best intervention won't work if people don't feel they've got permission to use it. Yeah, if the culture means that people feel they've got to be stiff upper lip and push on through, then it doesn't matter what you say to them about imposter syndrome, it's not going to work. So if you want to raise the topic, there are a number of things that you can do. The first one is don't even mention imposter syndrome unless you're pretty sure the person's going to sit there and nod and go yes. The majority of people have now heard of it. There is still actually some baggage around it. There's some common internet memes at the moment saying it was invented by the patriarchy to keep women playing small, which is just rubbish. But some people have baggage around the word, and that's fine. So instead, what I suggest you do is, firstly, do not say, can I have a chat? Because for somebody running imposter syndrome, they will immediately think they're about to be fired. Instead, ask permission to talk to them. Give them some behavioural indications of what it is you want to talk about. It might be, hey, I noticed in that meeting when you shared your idea, it was less edgy than the one that we discussed last week. I'm curious as to what was happening for you there, and I'd love to be able to support you. Would you like to chat? Yeah? So you pick a behavioural example that they will be able to identify with. You're asking permission, which is incredibly important. You're saying that you want to help them so they know that they're not going to be criticised and judged, and you're giving them the option. You can also use me. I was on this training session with this woman called Claire Yosa, and she was talking about this thing called imposter syndrome. And hey, I've definitely experienced it in the past. It's this, and I wondered, does that resonate with you? Yeah. So you can use me as an excuse. Yeah. Use my free resources as an excuse. So there are over 70 episodes on the Ditching Imposter Syndrome podcast. If there's one that resonates with you, maybe ask the person to listen to it. The most important thing is that only they know what's going on for them inside. If they want help, we need their consent. And by asking and giving examples that are behavioural, you are avoiding the trap of using identity level statements. Yeah. So you wouldn't say things like, hey, I noticed you were really nervous when you said such and such in that meeting. You were is identity level. It's also us guessing and assuming their lived experience, which they might have had a neon sign above their head saying they're nervous, but if that's not how they would have interpreted it, that kind of thing can really switch them off. So removing the taboo can also help culturally. You know, it's why, for example, I get really excited when I do a keynote for a large team, because I know it's going to shift how they talk about imposter syndrome. It's going to change the culture. It's going to make it acceptable just to talk about it and ask for help. Removing that taboo, because the taboo causes us to judge ourselves even more. We hide how we're feeling, and we do what I did back in 2000, which is assume that we're the only one having that experience. And so it's looking at those three amplifiers, and also what is it about the environment, about our processes, about our policies that might be triggering imposter syndrome for people and making it harder for them to feel safe to speak up and ask for help. So with removing the taboo, what if they don't agree? What if you prep all of this and the person's like, what do you mean I've got imposter syndrome? How dare you? Great. Don't even mention the words. Yeah. It's sometimes, particularly if we're excited about something, it's really easy to go, no, but you really do, because in this meeting I saw you do this and Claire said I had to say that. Forget the term imposter syndrome. The key is to help them to feel safe to talk about how they're feeling, to realize there are things they can do, rather than beating them over the head with a stick until they admit we're right. But because this is such a common problem, particularly if there's a taboo around imposter syndrome, and particularly for men, where the shame of admitting it is higher than it is for many women, I've got a free tool that you can send them to. So this is based on our two research studies, our two biggest research studies, plus the one we did in 2022 into burnout. And it gives them their imposter syndrome score. So that's at ditchingimpostersyndrome.com/quiz, or you can use the link scanning that QR code. And what this does, if I kind of go there, you can still see the QR code. So what this does is they answer about 20 questions. It uses our data to give them a risk score for imposter syndrome, whether it's low, moderate, or high. And it gives them a personalised action plan on some things they can start to do right away, because it's getting over that inertia, that fear of what if there's nothing I can do? What if this is how it is forever? That can start to make the biggest difference for them. So that is something else that you can do. If somebody is interested in finding out more, that quiz is a really great next step for them, because it's not from you. It's a third party giving them an independent view. So it helps to protect their trust in you, their relationship in you. And if they feel safe, they can also potentially share the action plan with you, which then gives you a basis to start that discussion. So it gives you the confidence to know what's actually real for them, what their lived experience might be, and to come up with ideas for how you can help and support them. And that is yours as my gift. So a question here, I love it when this comes up, okay? A lot of this is very similar to RSD, rejection sensitivity dysphoria. So what RSD is, for those who aren't kind of in the neurodivergent field, somebody running ADHD will often have rejection sensitivity dysphoria. It's not limited to people with ADHD, but what this means is that any kind of criticism, or even just our mind reading of criticism, can feel like we're being rejected at a heart level. Yeah, it hits us really, really hard. I'm ADHD and autistic. So it can hit us really hard. So if somebody's running imposter syndrome and they're neurodivergent, what can happen is it can be like a perfect storm on the coping strategies, because so many of the imposter syndrome coping strategies overlap with those that we use for our neurodivergence. So it can actually accentuate it and make it more severe, make it more likely that we will self-sabotage, but it can also increase the risk of clinical level anxiety and mental health issues. So if somebody's neurodivergent and you think they're running imposter syndrome, you need to tread really gently so that they know they're not being rejected. But things like this assessment can really help them, because it is objective, it's not personal, they're not being rejected by a PDF. So it can help to take some of the emotions out for them. So what can you do about it without becoming an accidental therapist? Okay, this is one of the biggest pitfalls. A lot of the stuff out there on the internet at the moment about imposter syndrome, we talked earlier about, you've got to look for the childhood event that caused it, or they're things that start going into the therapy world. That isn't appropriate in a workplace environment. You need really specific training to be a therapist. You need to be regulated. And you need to make sure that you're not going to accidentally unpackage some long repressed trauma. Now, I'm in the process of doing a master's degree in the neuroscience and psychology of mental health. And one of the things that's really shocking is that the number of people who it's estimated are struggling with PTSD, so post-traumatic stress disorder, is up at around 10%. So if you suddenly start fumbling around in somebody's past therapeutically at work, and they're one of the 1 in 10 that is holding it together despite PTSD, you actually risk triggering some really big stuff. So that is why I really, really strongly recommend, do not go the route of becoming the detective, the accidental therapist. And it's also why, trauma informed is like, if you come from a country where you've got rock, like candy rock, when you cut it in half, there's a word written all the way through the middle of that stick. If you cut me in half, firstly, there wouldn't be a Claire in the future, but if you cut me in half, what it would say is trauma informed. Okay? I am obsessed with this work being safe. Not because I want you to freak out, but because I want you to be able to relax and trust and know it's safe. So this trauma-informed, if you're thinking of applying something that you've seen online to help someone with imposter syndrome, just ask yourself that sanity check question before you use it. Would this reasonably risk causing trauma for somebody who's got Pandora's box closed? And if it would, please don't touch it. Okay? And there you go. I'm going to put my soapbox back in the corner. Okay? So, what can you do about it? So, they need to ditch a myth. If you're helping a team member who's struggling with imposter syndrome, the chances are they will have tried things. Okay, even if they don't know it's called imposter syndrome, they will have tried things to fix it, and they probably won't have worked, because most of them will have been about self-doubt rather than imposter syndrome. So they need to ditch the myth that it's incurable, and we just have to put up with it. The majority of people that you will talk to about this will have picked up that myth because they'll have tried things that haven't worked. Or they've been fed a narrative from somewhere that, just try this affirmation and imposter syndrome disappears. It doesn't work that way because it's actually programmed into the nervous system. It's not just a thinking thing. So, it's not incurable. It's not something you have to put up with. You just need the right strategies. So if you can help them to see that, then you're starting by giving them hope. And that is the most important thing they need to start with, is the hope that there's something they can do, that this isn't how it will be forever, and that they can turn this around. Now, the biggest advice that's out there on the internet is just push on through the fear. Just toughen up, pull your socks up. The problem when we push on through the fear is it reroutes the blood flow in the brain from this bit that has your brilliant ideas to this bit that likes to think about nothing but survival. And that is not a great place for creativity and performance, and it's a great way to make lots of tiny mistakes in the details that don't matter if you're trying to decide whether or not to run from the saber-toothed tiger. It leads to the burnout, to mental health issues, to self-sabotage. So I talk instead about clearing the fear and doing it anyway. So rather than encouraging someone, just push on through that fear and let's get it done, it's let's clear the fear, let's release the fear and do it anyway. That's really cool. We've got somebody who's got to head off, but they just said they used my 2019 Imposter Syndrome research study as part of the research when they were studying for their counselling qualification. Thank you. That's great to hear. It's taught on MBAs actually, which kind of freaks me out sometimes when you get contacted by somebody doing a PhD and they want to cite the research. But there we go. One of those weird and wonderful things. So, how do you clear the fear? There are things I teach that are unsurprisingly beyond the scope of a 60-minute training session that help people to get to that deeper level to clear out the fears. And the work that we do clears out the fear, not just cognitively, but it releases the body's memory of it as well, so that the person is completely free from it. But what can you do if you're working with someone, if you're managing someone, or you've got a client who you can sense has got that imposter syndrome block, stopping them from taking action or causing them to self-sabotage? So I invite you to do a bit of a reframe here. As I said at the beginning, one of the most popular things that came up is in the run-up to this session was, how can I help somebody in my team feel more confident? So firstly, the problem with confidence is that's about what we can and can't do, whereas imposter syndrome is who we are. So you can actually feel confident and still experience imposter syndrome. You know, you can be a confident presenter because confidence is context dependent, but be crippled with fear that you'll be found out as a fraud if you share your ideas. So confidence isn't actually the antidote or solution to imposter syndrome. And I'm going to give you a technique today that is super, super simple that you can start using right away. So, we're convinced confidence is the answer, but it's actually back to front. Confidence is like a destination. It's not the solution. So let's look at courage versus confidence. So courage is taking action despite the fear. Now that's not pushing on through the fear. It's about getting the fear back into proportion. Yeah, and going, all right, I'm a bit scared of this. I'm going to choose to do this anyway. So this is one of the keys here, is you're not pushing on through the fear. You're saying, let's get that fear back down to proportion. And now I choose to take that action. I choose to have the courage to do this. So you're not pushing on through from a place of fear, worry, and anxiety. You're saying, I reclaim my personal power to choose this, and the energy I'm going to show is courage. Can you feel that difference, yeah? And confidence is not feeling the fear in the first place. So when we set ourselves the goal of, I have to feel confident, but the fear is what's running our major decisions, it's kind of a really big mismatch. If what we focus on instead is helping people to develop the courage, so the skill set to be able to bring the fear back into proportion is to realize maybe it's not quite so huge anyway, and then have the courage and take the action from courage rather than anxiety. That, over time, helps to bring confidence. So micro courage, those tiny actions where we can take that deep breath in, take that deep breath out and go, I choose to do this. We do it. And then the internal system kind of goes, I did it. And it might be tiny, but the micro courage actions every day create confidence. And it is a gentle way of resetting the fear, rewriting the neural pathways in the brain, changing the filters in the brain to spot what we're doing well. So the micro courage actions create confidence, but removing the imposter syndrome blocks make it faster. So if you want something you can do with your team right away, if you want to help them to get that kind of fear-based self-talk back into proportion, there's a question that you can ask them, and you need good rapport for this. Is that really true, or is it just imposter syndrome speaking? Okay. Is that really, and just might be doing some heavy lifting. Okay. And you would find your own words for that. Is that really true, or is it imposter syndrome speaking? For the vast majority of the time, the person will sit there and it's like you almost see their face kind of go, yeah. And they'll often just sit there and go, actually, no, it's imposter syndrome. And no, it's actually not really true. Great. How can I help you to find the micro courage to choose to do this? And when you focus on micro courage, instead of this potentially what can feel impossible goal of ultimate confidence, which if you're running perfectionism is totally out of reach, yeah? If you focus on the micro courage, having helped to reset the fear response, this is something that you can do day to day That if over time, if in your one-to-ones, you're sitting there saying to the person, hey, where did you show micro courage this week? It helps to build up that internal referencing system so they know they're doing a good job. This is something that you can do without needing the deeper training to go and be a coach in this or a master coach in this work. It's something that you could start doing right away, is shift the focus from how can I help them build their confidence to how can I help them to feel safe to show courage. And that is the key. How can I help them to feel safe to show courage? Because when we've had the courage to do something, not pushing on through the fear, but courage is about power. It's about internal resources. When we do that, even with the tiniest things, and it works, that leads to confidence. So I'd love to hear from you via the chat. I'm going to keep going in a moment to give you time to think about this. Can you imagine anyone in your team or in your colleagues or clients that might help with? Where micro courage and focusing on that instead of a potentially unattainable goal of the ultimate confidence might help to unlock them feeling safe to stretch, to grow, to take risks they might not previously have taken. So confidence is micro courage in action. So, a little known truth, and I'm going to give you two of them if you want to help other people with imposter syndrome. So the first one is do not fall into this trap, okay? It's not your job to fix somebody else's imposter syndrome. If you've not had the specialist training to be able to do the identity level work without going into therapy, it's not your responsibility. There are things you can do to help them, but it's not your job to fix them. I'm saying that because so many of the people managers and leaders who talk to me about imposter syndrome feel this big responsibility. They want to help someone. They can see what can be done. They can see the person's potential, and so they take on that responsibility. It's not yours. This is specialist work, and it doesn't take that long to train in it, but if you've not had that training, please cut yourself some slack, okay? And the second truth is there is a secret block on all of this, and it came up so often in the questions and the comments prior to this session, is you need to clear out your own imposter syndrome first, okay? You are much more likely to be able to spot imposter syndrome in a team member or a client if you've experienced it yourself, because it gives you a radar. So if you clear out your own first, it avoids the pitfall that you can't take them to somewhere that you secretly believe is impossible. So if you think it's incurable and then you try and help somebody to clear it, they're going to unconsciously pick up on the signals that you won't realize you're even giving of, yeah, I don't think it's going to work. Yeah? So the likelihood of them getting results is really low. So you clear out your own imposter syndrome first, or at least start that journey, and then it's easier to help them. This also has a huge benefit that you do not risk subconsciously projecting your pain, your lived experience, your assumptions onto how they are experiencing imposter syndrome. So the more you can clear it out for yourself, the easier it is to help others. So I have something I'm gifting everybody on this call. So this is my 10th book, which came out in May this year, Coaching Imposter Syndrome. It's what to do when it gate crashes your one-to-ones. So it covers some of what we've talked about today, and it also covers the things that it's safe for you to do in a working environment without the advanced training. It explains some more of the theory, explains some more of the techniques, how it all works. But that book is designed to be read in an afternoon. It's designed to be practical, things like removing the taboo. There's more information on that. So it's an additional resource. So you can get that at coachingimpostersyndrome.com if books are the way you want to learn, and it's also available on Audible. And you've also got Ditching Imposter Syndrome, which I published in 2019. This has already helped thousands of people around the world to clear it out once and for all. So if you're somebody that's quite self-motivated, that's another option as well, and it's something you can recommend to a team member. And actually, I can let you in on a secret, is in the next couple of weeks, we're going to be launching something called Ask Claire. So we've spent the last 6 months creating a complete closed system, AI kind of coach, to support people on their ditching imposter syndrome journey. It's not like ChatGPT or Google. It's been trained on 2.7 million of my words, and that's not That's not a typo, as it were. So it gives people suggestions of what would help them the most in that moment. And it's designed to be conversational. So if you combine that with ditching imposter syndrome, it can make a huge difference. So if you want to help others more deeply, I am going to tell you how you can work with me to get certified. But whether or not you want to do that next, I'm really glad that you've joined me today, and I've got something else I want to share with you at the end. So if you want to be able to go beyond the sort of T and sympathy and the strategies that I teach on that first level basis in coaching imposter syndrome, then you can learn how to apply the researched method that underpins all of this. We call it the natural resilience method because it's getting away from that toxic resilience and pushing on through. And this is a cycle that is designed to be gone around a number of times at different levels to safely and effectively clear out imposter syndrome. So they start by pressing pause, and that's pressing pause on the stress, on the nervous system load, on that hypervigilance, because if somebody doesn't feel safe, they can't make change in their lives. We then move on to the cognitive stuff and the mindset stuff, and that's rewiring the brain. So this is using the power of neuroplasticity to shift the brain's filters and thought habits to be more supportive. But then we then look at rewiring the body. So this is taking out the hypervigilance and the chronic stress. They leave muscle memory. They leave memories in the body that mean even if you change your thoughts, it's like dandelions. If you've not pulled out the whole root, it's going to come back up within a couple of months. This is where we do some of the deeper work to really clear out the imposter syndrome triggers that happen at a body level and that happen in the primal part of the brain. Then step 4 is looking at personal power, resetting toxic boundaries in healthy ways. And this is particularly where we're looking at doing some of that identity level work and clearing out the triggers for the 4 Ps, the perfectionism, procrastination, project paralysis, and people pleasing. And step 5 is about becoming the real you. So if you've been working with people formally or informally coaching them, you will often start with, what do you want and who do you want to be? What do you want to achieve? If you do that as step 1, what you get is the tiny little box they're living in that feels safe due to imposter syndrome. If you do a round of clearing out imposter syndrome and then ask them, that dream is a lot bigger. And then you can go round the cycle for the next layer, the next layer, and the next layer. And that's how this process works. If that's something you want to learn how to do, you've got 2 options. You can either DIY, go and use Google, figure it out for yourself, or you can let me guide you through it if that's resonating with you. If you wanted to work with me on this in the Imposter Syndrome Practitioner program, there are 2 phases. So we start by clearing out your own imposter syndrome. Yeah? Deal with yours first, get it out of the way, and then you learn how to help others safely and effectively, using the tools that you've just used for yourself and some deeper tools as well, because then you've got that lived experience of this stuff works. And it takes 12 weekly modules. We have a couple of integration weeks because people always have stuff come up and need to catch up. Each module is about an hour a week. So on a Monday, you get that week's installment of training, some of its videos, workbooks, techniques for you to practice. Twice a month, we have a tutorial. And the reason I'm raising this with you today is our final cohort this year starts on the 20th of October, and it's actually the last one that I personally am running. After that, it's going to be run by my master coaches. And I was supposed to stop this earlier this year, but I love it and I didn't want to. So this is my swan song of the last round I'm going to personally be coaching. After that, I'm going to be moving on to support people in learning how to coach some of the deeper techniques and our new Rise Like a Rebel program. So this is your last chance to really get me in a tutorial twice a month. Now these tutorials, they're not just question and answer. They're where I get to share with you the ninja tips that are relevant to you and your particular cohort, which is limited at 12 people because I want to get to know everyone and I want you to get to know each other. So the twice monthly tutorials are where we teach things that I never would have imagined of putting in the course, but they're the ones that are most important to you. And you get 2 busy person friendly implementation assignments. So this is not just about show up, tick a box, I actually want you to go and use this stuff and to feel confident. So those assignments are literally, right, pick one of this week's techniques and go and show it to somebody, teach it to somebody, play with it. Yeah. So that by the time you finish this course, and you've been supported through doing 3 case studies, so the tutorial calls continue while you're doing your 3 case studies. By the end of the program, you're actually really confident. You've been doing this stuff. You've got over the hardest part, which is the first person you ever share the ideas with, okay? And you've learned the ninja tips. You've seen also learning from each other, because each case study you do, when we're discussing them in the tutorials, it's like you're doing everybody else's case studies too. So if that's something that interests you, the process is go and find out more. You can look at the QR code, or the URL is ditchingimpostersyndrome.com/train. And you need to apply, because I want to make sure this is a great fit for you. The application isn't scary. It's not like a job interview. I just want to help understand what it is about the program that you're looking for, to help make sure that's a great fit, to help make sure I'm the right person for you to work with, and to help make sure that you're actually quite excited. Okay, because this is a bit of effort. It's not a huge effort, but it is a bit of effort and it's a commitment. And I really want to make sure that's a great fit. But I want to share with you some things inside the program that are non-negotiable. And that is back to this stick of rock thing. It's trauma informed, not as a separate module on the end. Every single step, all the way through, everything you're going to be doing, it's safe. It's evidence-based, science-backed, researched, tested, over 20 years. It's proven to work, and you can use variations on the imposter syndrome assessment tool I talked about earlier to be able to assess the impact it's had for whoever you're working with. So it's measurable results. You get supported implementation, which is something that's really important to me, because otherwise, I don't know about you, but so often I've done a course and I might even pass an assignment and then I never use the stuff again. That's not what I want for you on this. Is we actually support you in bringing this into your own practice, whether you're working officially as a coach, whether you're just doing it informally in your organization. And it's expert-led, not just peer support. So if you're stuck, it's not the equivalent of going to Google for answers. You get expert answers to your questions. 20th of October, the last one I'm running. If you go to the QR code and read the details, apply, it's not scary, and you can confirm your place right away if your application is successful. And get started for the 20th of October. But as I say, it's the last one I personally am tutoring. So, if you've got any questions about that, please do let me know. I'm about to head into the Q&A section, and I've got some questions that we prepared earlier, but I also want to give you a chance right now. What is it that you're going to take away from this session that you could actually implement? Yeah, that's made a difference to you today. And let me know your questions, and I'm going to leave you with what people say they would do differently once they've cleared imposter syndrome. Speak up more. Not fear failure. Give it a go. Not put myself down in front of others, be more visible, put myself forward more, trust myself more, feel more confident, have clearer boundaries, share my ideas without toning them down, close more deals, go for that opportunity, over-deliver without the stress, say yes more, and be happy. That is a pretty awesome place to be. So, questions. What questions have you got for me? That wraps. In fact, gosh, our timing is perfect. It's 3 p.m. That's your hour. I'm really happy to stay on and answer any questions that you might have about if you wanted to take this further and work with me on this, or questions that you've had that have come up for you during the session. Okay, I'm also going to pop outside and grab my hidden iPad that was trying to go off earlier in the session, because I've picked up some of the questions that I had from the emails as well, which I want to take you through. So just give me a moment to do that. Let me know if you've got a question. This is your chance to pick my brain. And I'm back. Okay, so, right, some of the questions that also came up are, so I think we've covered, I want to learn more about it so I can identify it sooner. If we've not covered that, let me know a question in the chat. As a leader, how can I support my direct reports? We've covered quite a few ideas for that today. Coaching imposter syndrome is also I wrote it for people who are line managers and leaders who want to know what to do about imposter syndrome, but without going in and actually doing the deeper training. Okay, in a creative environment, what difference does it make? So I talked briefly earlier about how it changes the blood flow in the brain from the prefrontal cortex to the primal part that only cares about survival. Unfortunately, it's this part of the brain that has the creative, fantastic ideas. And if somebody is running that fear of being found out as not good enough, or that fear of being judged, then it means that they're extremely unlikely to be creative. Yeah, fear trashes creativity. So in creative environments, it really is important to clear out imposter syndrome. Similarly, I work a lot in scientific companies, data-driven companies, financial companies, partly because of my engineering background. One of the things that's really important there is there's often a right and wrong. It's a bit more black and white. So if you make a mistake, it's more obvious. Yeah? And so that can also crank up the risks. Okay, how can you craft feedback for those affected by imposter syndrome without adding to their negative self-perceptions? So this is one of the things that we're actually launching Ask Claire for. So you can find that at askclaire.ai. Is we've actually trained it to be able to help you to phrase the feedback to make it imposter syndrome safe. So you can tell it a bit about the person, what the feedback is, and it will give you suggestions for how to phrase it. What I would suggest right now, though, is any feedback, firstly, do not tell them you want to have a chat. Okay? Can we have a chat is the worst thing you can say. When you're giving feedback, you always need permission. Even if it's a compulsory annual review, you still need permission. Without permission, you risk triggering harm and trauma. The key then next is to make it behavioural. Not you were nervous, you were bad at this, but describe the behaviour that you observed, because then it helps the person go back in their memory to, yeah, I remember that. So then anything you say is already anchored in the two of you looking at the same movie, if that makes sense. Then, forget the feedback sandwich. It's one of the biggest triggers for imposter syndrome. You did this really well, but you were terrible at that. But overall, I think you're fantastic. So what happens with imposter syndrome is we wait for the but. We've trained ourselves to wait for the but. And if the but doesn't come, our research found for 44% of people, they will actually volunteer it. Okay? So forget the feedback sandwich. What you can do instead is you talk about what you noticed, and then instead of giving them constructive criticism, you talk about the different behaviour you want to see. So you talk about the problem. I noticed that your face looked like there was physical tension when you were about to share your idea. To make it easier for you next time, I invite you to consider. And that's where you give the feedback. So the feedback is talking about what you want to see instead of the problem. Now this is really important because of something called mental rehearsal. Mental rehearsal is where they've done it with sports people, with pianists. You can imagine doing something clearly enough in your mind that then actually improves or changes your performance in the physical world. It's the same with imposter syndrome. The stories we tell ourselves in our mind create neural pathways in the brain that change the results we get. So if you tell somebody don't do this, they've first got to imagine doing this, and the don't gets lost. So I would invite you with the feedback to, instead of focusing on what you don't want them to do, to make it even better, to improve your performance, to help you to feel you can be more in flow with this, I invite you to do, and then you give them feedback on the behaviour you want to see instead. So the mental rehearsal is actually for the change you want to see. So much feedback is stop doing this, and then expecting the person to work out what they're meant to do instead. And that doesn't work if they don't already have that answer inside of themselves. So this is what I would be looking at for feedback. Okay, what else have we got that we've not covered yet? So how can I help my team break out of a cycle of burning themselves out in an effort to continuously improve themselves? So I'd be sitting down with them, ideally somewhere neutral, ideally somewhere that's not the workplace. And if it feels comfortable and appropriate, ask them what's going on. Yeah, ask them what it is that's driving them to continually improve themselves. Because for some people, they will constantly want to learn and grow and thrive because they're driven to do that. But for a lot of people, and the reason it can lead to burnout is because it's fear-based. When we're dealing with imposter syndrome, the techniques that I teach on the practitioner and the imposter syndrome master coach program actually help you to help the person to rewire their brain so they spot what they're doing well, so there's less of this drive to keep pushing and pushing themselves, but ironically they then actually get better results. But it's worth exploring with them. What is it that's causing you to push yourself so hard? Because the chances are it could be something to do with the 4 Ps of imposter syndrome. And then there are techniques they can use to rewire those neural pathways and the internal referencing system, which is what tells us whether or not we think we're doing a good job, so that they can build that courage, build that confidence, and they can thrive at whichever version of them they're being. And then the stretching and growing becomes a conscious, hope-based thing rather than driven by a fear and anxiety. Okay, we've covered things like how do we spot it? How can we explore the behaviours? Okay, how can I support to prevent this being an issue when under demands of project timelines? So there's a time and a place. There will be in any work cycle, there are peak times and there are lull times. And the lull time is when to explore things like imposter syndrome. If somebody is super stressed, they'll be stuck in chronic stress, probably in the primal part of the brain, probably with hypervigilance on the lookout for threats. They do not feel safe to be able to do that internal work. So pick the lull points, except there might be a project that you need to let wind down, and pick those lull points to have that kind of conversation. And I'd invite you to follow some of the strategies that we've covered today. So, all right, I didn't realize imposter syndrome was linked to neurodivergency. Could you go deeper into that link? Are there any strategies that particularly apply for neurodivergent people? Great question. So here's the irony. Until about 2 years ago, I thought I was neurotypical. I had no idea that I was neurodivergent because I'd mastered it so well. I'd mastered it from myself, and also my whole family for multiple generations is neurodivergent, so that was normal for me. So almost by happy accident, everything I teach is tailored for neurodivergent brains and nervous systems. And the way I teach is tailored as well, particularly with ADHD, with interest-driven nervous systems, being able to tick things off lists, having things broken down, having clear pathways on what we're doing with training, and having that, adding to the interest by having the tutorials where we can go down rabbit holes. So anything I teach, anything you read in my books, hear on my podcasts, or join with me on any of my programs is automatically suitable for neurodivergent people because that's the brain that created them. Obviously, neurodivergence is a very wide field and each of us has a unique experience of it. But the key with people who are neurodivergent is probably to start with work to support them on releasing those 4 Ps. The perfectionism, procrastination, project paralysis, and people pleasing. Because for so many of us, they're actually coping strategies we were already using for the neurodivergence. And the brilliant thing is when you reduce the reliance on them and the need for them, you actually reduce them for the neurodivergent part of us too. So it has a double whammy. It clears imposter syndrome and it helps us be more in flow and mask less and need fewer coping strategies for the neurodivergence as well. So I hope that helps on that question. It's something I will be talking a lot more about next year, is the link between neurodivergence and imposter syndrome. And it's not that a neurodivergent person is necessarily more likely to experience it, but when they do, it's likely to be a deeper and more profound experience for them. Right, I'm going to wrap it up there because I think we finished all the questions. If you've still got one, come and find me on LinkedIn. I'm Claire Yosa. Connect with me, not just following, because then you can send me a direct message and I will happily answer your question. And I really look forward to working together in the future, hopefully, and I hope you found today useful. And please go out there and whatever your one thing is that was your big takeaway, go and use this stuff and make a difference. Thank you for your time today.